and welcome to Fiction Fans, a podcast where we read books and other words too. I'm Lily.
And I'm Sarah, and we are delighted to be joined this episode by Spencer, but tragically not by Gabe, from the Fantasy Files podcast. Hello.
How's it going?
Wait, so I heard that Gabe had maybe similar feelings about this book as I did, so I'm a little bummed he's not here to shout about it with us.
Yeah, he couldn't make it. I had to lock him in his cage. I found out that he was bolstering our subscriber base by making fake YouTube accounts, so he's just not able to be here.
So what you're saying is that he needs to get better at doing that so you don't notice next time.
Yeah, I mean, all of his fake accounts were just Gabe with some random set of numbers, so it was pretty obvious.
Well, once he figures that out, we need to have you both back on. We are going to be talking about The Gunslinger by Stephen King. And before we start shouting about that, it's a little preview for what's going to be coming. What's something good that happened lately?
So something good that happened is back in February, I ordered a bed frame and it was horribly back ordered and only just arrived. And so I finally get to be sleeping on an actual bed frame, like an actual adult, instead of a mattress on my floor, like just out of college student that I have not been for a number of years.
Did it make you feel young inside, though?
No, it made me feel creaky getting up from that low on the ground.
Yeah.
Oh, well, congrats on the new bed frame.
Yeah, I have a bed frame, but my bed is currently doing the same thing because my dog is a dachshund and he likes to jump up on the bed.
Oh.
And he won't learn how to use a ramp or stairs or anything. And it's like so bad for their back to jump like really high on and off of things. So I was like, you know what? I can't train him to use this ramp. I bought 3 different kinds of ramps and I tried treats. I tried everything. He didn't want to learn how to do it. So I was like, I'm going to give up and I'm going to just set my bed on the ground so it's less of a distance for him to jump.
That was actually the good thing because Snorri likes to jump on the bed. And so, when it's lower, it's easier for him. Mr. Squeak, my other pug, theoretically, she could jump on the bed when it's just a mattress on the ground, but she did not because she does not know how to jump up on things. She expects to be picked up like a princess. And to be fair, I mean, I do pick her up.
Yeah.
So she's not wrong.
So she's not wrong. She has trained me instead of the other way around.
Yeah.
My good thing is that I found my sunglasses. They've been missing for like a month and the sun has finally come out. So just in fucking time.
That's very exciting. Although, Spencer, I don't think you actually said what your good thing was. I'm
allowed to go second.
No, yeah, because everything is just pain and darkness. No, so I'm moving next week to a different state and I need to tow my truck, get like a U-Haul truck and tow it behind me because I don't want to drive, 400 something miles in a truck that's already kind of old. And so I had originally called Penske and they quoted me at like almost $4,000. For a truck and just a little tow hitch to tow it. And so I was like, I'm not going to be able to do it. Like there's no way. I'm just going to have to like drive my truck and get some sort of trailer and put all those miles on my truck. But then I called U-Haul and they are down at, I think it was like $1,300 for the truck and tow package combo. I know that's such like a boring adult thing, but like, I was like, yes.
I mean, it goes well with getting a new bed frame.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, what is everyone drinking tonight?
This book made me think whiskey. Oh. So I am drinking whiskey in one hand and water in the other.
There is a lot of whiskey in the Tull section? Tulls?
Tull, I think.
Oh, the chapter 1 or whatever, where he's in the little town. Yeah. I'm also drinking whiskey bourbon. It's kind of some sort of Frankenstein between a Manhattan and an old fashioned. It's like an old fashioned, but it's got vermouth in it. And yeah, I love this drink. It's got my favorite. I don't know are you guys familiar with Woodinville bourbon?
Yeah, hell yeah.
Yeah, I love that stuff. It's like my favorite. So
I once roped family into going up to Woodinville, and they all humored me and went to the whiskey tasting room, except none of them actually liked whiskey. So they tasted it and then gave it to me to finish. And that was a day.
Yeah, I bet. I've never been to the actual distillery. That's cool.
We didn't get to do a tour or anything because we showed up too late, which was too bad. But
So I got in an argument the other day with somebody on Twitter, as I'm prone to do, and they were saying that they take shots of whiskey, and I'm like, that's not how you're supposed to drink it. How do you guys drink whiskey?
You take shots of bad whiskey because you don't want to taste that.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. That's what I was saying.
Like, I'm drinking Basil Hayden, which I drink on the rocks, and you sip it because it's delicious.
Yeah.
Yeah. I generally skip the ice, but you sip it.
Mm-hmm. There are definitely whiskeys that I would take a shot, like as a pickleback or something, which are also delicious, but in a very different way.
Sure.
But yeah, not like good bourbon. No.
I think whoever you were talking to was just wrong.
I know. That's what I'm saying. I'm like, that's just not how you do it. But okay, teach their own, I guess.
Maybe they've just only ever had Jack Daniels.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that we're the whiskey crowd today. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Very appropriate. And before we jump into our book for this evening, has anyone read anything good lately? I have not. I'll get that out of the way.
I finally finished The Phlebotomist by Chris Panettiere. I was in a little bit of a book slump, so it took me longer, through no fault of the book. So it took me a little longer to read than I had wanted to. But those last 100 pages, like, they just flew by.
What kind of book is it? It doesn't sound like it would be like fantasy or something.
It is, I would classify it as fantasy, almost more along the lines of urban fantasy, in the sense that it takes place in an urban setting, but also kind of like post-apocalyptic.
Oh, really?
There's a big spoiler that I cannot say that,
Okay.
that makes a difference.
When the genre of a book is a spoiler.
Well, it's not that the genre itself is a spoiler, but like this thing would really help to describe the genre, and I cannot say it.
Right, for sure.
But it's a great book, so I really enjoyed it.
So you guys have probably seen me post about this a lot on Twitter. I'm a huge fan of the King's Dark Tidings series by Kel Cade.
Mm-hmm.
And she just released a prequel novella about one of the, I guess, main side characters. And it was so good. And it just sparked this whole rampage I went on, where I'm like, I read the prequel novella. I had just read the whole series maybe like 6 months ago or so. And then I read the prequel and I was like, I'm doing another reread. I'm just doing it. And so then that started. I had to pause the King's Dark Tidings book that I was on to read this one. And then tomorrow I'll be going back to King's Dark Tidings.
That's awesome, though. A series that always sucks you back in is such a special thing.
Oh, yeah. I would say that it's like my number 2 favorite series, next to like Dresden Files, because Dresden will always be my number 1. And so KDT is definitely my number 2 favorite.
That's high praise.
I definitely recommend it if anybody's into just like epic fantasy in like the most literal sense of the term. Big scope, that kind of thing.
Wonderful. Well, speaking of big scope, I don't know what version of the Gunslinger you had, but I had the re-release. I guess when King finished the whole series, he went back and like edited the first book and wrote a new foreword. And one of the quotes in the foreword is, "I wanted to write the longest popular novel in history," which is not a good goal.
I feel like if that's going to be your goal, you should have other goals for the series besides that.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's the tone this whole conversation's going to have.
Yeah. I mean, that's certainly fair if the series ends up being that, like, something like A Wheel of Time or Malazan or something like that. But yeah, maybe don't go into your first book with that in mind, I would say.
Yeah, just a weird thing to set out to do.
Yeah, because I feel like if your goal is to write the longest thing, you're going to end up bloating it a whole lot and maybe stringing it out too much.
And have something that's confusing and convoluted the way that the Gunslinger was.
Yeah.
Before we dive in, I'm going to delay us again one more time. None of us have read the Dark Towers series before. It sounds like. I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Okay.
Correct. Yeah.
Although I believe that our cousin is a big fan.
Oh, no.
Our mutual cousin. Yeah.
I'm going to have words for her. Invite her on the podcast. Put her up on the shooting block. Anyway. I have read some Stephen King books before, though. And I will say my experience with them was kind of the exact same as my experience with the Gunslinger.
Really?
Yeah, I really love his concepts. He comes up with really cool ideas. And then the execution of them just never really clicks for me. I don't know. I read Carrie and I read The Shining, and both of those were just not what I wanted in a book.
Interesting. Okay, I have Salem's Lot on my TBR. It's actually coming up pretty soon. And I've heard that a lot of the Dark Tower books have to do with there's Easter eggs from Salem's Lot. I can't remember if The Shining was one of them. There's a few of them that are all kind of part of this multiverse. So I was originally going to read it before we went into the Gunslinger, but then I just put it off.
Yeah. And the other books that I've named are all from a similar era. I don't know. I mean, I assume he grew as an author out of the 70s.
Yeah.
One should hope so.
Yeah. I don't know. All the books of his that all two of them I have not been super into.
This was my first Stephen King novel.
Same.
And I think, like you, Lily, I thought some of the ideas were cool and some of the concepts were cool, but just the execution did not work for me. And also, I normally like in media res, but it didn't work for me in this book either. So this book was not for me, ultimately. I've heard book 2 gets much better, for what it's worth.
Same. Yeah.
But
yeah. Matter of fact, I had heard something that said on some booktube channel, somebody was saying that reading the first book, you're gonna feel like you're kind of thrown into the middle of this whole thing that's going on, and you're gonna be really confused, and that it really helps to read book 2 immediately after. And we'll kind of get to, I have thoughts on the ending and kind of where I fall on it, but I'm sure we'll get to that. But yeah, I've heard that it definitely gets better.
yeah, by about midway through the book, I was pretty okay with the world and where we were with it.
Yeah.
But I just had a really rocky start.
Oh, yeah.
I did not feel that way at all. I feel like I got more annoyed with it the farther in I got. And I actually started pretty on board, which is maybe a bad sign.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I kind of enjoy the let's find out what the hell is going on vibe that we had.
Sure.
It wasn't that I liked finding out what was going on. It was just I had so much trouble with the world building.
Mm-hmm.
I was interested in finding out what was the action that was happening. It was specifically the setting and the language and stuff that I had trouble with.
No, I mean, okay, I did not enjoy the different dialects he has invented for this world. I found them unnecessary, just needlessly complicated.
Yeah.
But I mean, so we're thrown into this desert world and people are wearing jeans and there's guns. So there's some sort of industry, right? But then we find out a little more. I think it's best illustrated by the fact that demons are dropped pretty early on, but it's not totally clear if they mean literal demons or just the concept of demons.
Right.
Because there's a lot of Christianity in this book, which I was a little surprised by. But then a little while later, they mention a Taheen, which is a man with a raven's head. And you're like, oh, no, they probably meant literal demons. That's where we are. Okay, cool. And that kind of thing I enjoyed. And then the setting gets more complicated. There's also, castles, but also, again, jeans and t-shirts. It's weird. It's a weird place, but I liked it. That part was not what threw me for a loop.
I think the thing that kind of threw me is, and I this might be a hot take, I don't know, but I just cannot do like a lot of kind of older literature, whether it's classic fantasy or whatever. Even Wheel of Time is like right on the precipice of the way that it's written and the kind of language that's used. It's like right on the edge of like, what I do and don't like. I'm very much like a modern fantasy reader. And I think if this story had been rewritten in like, even like 2015 or something, it would have made so much more sense. Because listening to the audiobook, and I should also note that I think that I had the oldest version. I think I had like the original one before it was revised.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because I saw something saying that the revised version is called the Gunslinger, and the older one is called the Dark Tower 1, and that's the one that is available on Audible. Oh. And so I think that's the one I have. I'm not completely sure, but a lot of the like language that's used and just like I can't exactly put my finger on it, but just the way that he conveyed the story felt very like kind of old timey. I know it was only like the 70s or whatever, but for me, that's old.
I mean, I think when it comes to fantasy, that qualifies as old.
Yeah.
And I do think in the foreword he wrote, he mentions when he was younger, he thought more words were better than fewer words. And that was one of the things he cleaned up.
Interesting.
I didn't have a problem with his prose too much in this book. But again, I read the edited version, so that could definitely be where that's coming from. He did invent this like dialect that all of the dialogue is in. There's a lot of these, and that was not for me.
Yeah, that was part of my problem with it too, is I just didn't enjoy the dialogue.
I almost wonder if that's something that he added after, because I don't remember. Again, I was listening on audiobook and it could have just flown right past me, but I don't remember any language like that.
Interesting.
Now I want to go through the foreword and see if he mentions anything about that.
There were a few moments in this book where while I was reading something, as the reader, I was going, what are you doing? Like, this is clearly, a bad idea, or something's going horribly wrong. And then I was vindicated by one of the other characters in the book agreeing with me and telling the gunslinger he's doing something stupid. The best example, the only non-spoilery example of that is when one of the characters is cooking dinner for him, and he's cooking beans that are dried, and he only cooks them for like an hour. And I was like, that's not enough. Stephen King, have you ever cooked before? But then, like, the next page, the gunslinger says, oh, they were as hard as bullets. And I was like, yeah, because they didn't cook them for long enough. That's a very low stakes example, but
yeah,
it does show up a couple of times. Jake, I think, is the character that calls him out on the most stuff, but...
So how long are you supposed to cook beans?
The longer you do it, the softer they get. And I like refried beans, pinto beans. So I'll boil them for like half a day.
And especially if you let them soak.
Yeah.
Which I don't think they had enough water to do, really.
No.
So.
Yeah, for sure. That was a commodity, wasn't it?
Gosh, is this the part where we talk about how I really get the feeling that every time Stephen King meets a woman, his first thought is, would I put my dick in that?
I was very unimpressed by the way that he wrote all of the women in this book.
All four of them?
Yeah. Just any woman was sexualized.
I was going to say, how many were there really? Because there was the two, I don't want to go into spoilers, I guess, but there was the two in Toll.
Mm-hmm.
And then I feel like it had a pretty small cast of characters. Who else was there besides, was his mom in the flashback?
There was his mom, his ex-lover that we don't actually know much about. I don't think we ever saw her at all.
Oh, okay.
But just like the women, even if they weren't like main characters, like some of the children, like female children, were described in sexual ways. And it was just...
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's always, what do their breasts look like? Also, they're 12.
Yes.
There's at one point, he's describing one of the townspeople in Tull. There's a 13-year-old boy and his Jilly child. I did have to look this up. Jilly is his word for concubine.
Oh, I do remember this. Yeah.
So he's referring to this 13-year-old boy hanging out with the girl his own age as hanging out with his concubine. Why, Stephen King? Why? And then I think the very worst is not even a person, a corpse. At one point, the gunslinger kills someone. That's not a spoiler. He kills a lot of people. And the quote is, "She landed in a whorish sprawl, her skirt rucked up between her thighs." My dude, you just murdered her. That's not what should be going through your head. Just constant.
Yeah, that is weird language.
Yeah. He does bring up the Oedipus complex at one point. Just as a throwaway line, and I'm like, you really didn't need to add to this. There's enough. Oh man. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. It was a thing. It was a thing.
I mean, one or two, okay, but all of them, even the unnamed characters, even the not even on screen characters, it's not a good look.
Yeah.
I do wonder if that's something that continues throughout the series, or if as Stephen King matures as an author, as a writer, if he gets better at giving the women more characteristics than just how they are sexually. Having
titties.
Yeah.
The greatest personality trait.
The greatest person.
I think it was fascinating. So the character who's bad at cooking beans is a dweller. He's a desert dweller. And he's described as being, all weathered and beaten and a survivor, and he's amazing. And then the book describes Allie, who the gunslinger ends up in a relationship with for a short period of time. And she's so weathered and sad and pathetic and old. It's like, these are both people surviving in very harsh conditions. Why is one of them impressive and one of them pathetic?
Yeah.
But yeah, constantly.
Yeah, it's true.
I the fact that he had that like perfect mirror was like, you're just giving it to me.
Yeah. I
also feel like King thought we were going to forget who Allie was.
Yes, thank you. Oh my God.
Did that bother you too?
This was driving me up the fucking wall. Like, oh my God.
Yeah, it was just wild the way that he thought we would forget, or wanted to constantly drive home that the gunslinger had sex with this woman in this town. We know this, Stephen King.
Even besides that, if he would ever think back to Allie or whatever, he would always say, the girl from, what was the name of the town?
Tull.
Tull.
Yeah.
The girl from Tull. It's like, yes, we know. And not only that, but not only was Tull 50 pages ago, but you reminding us that she was from Tull was 3 pages ago. So you don't need to do it again.
And did he do that with anything else? I feel like it was just her.
I don't think so. I mean, it's not like every time he was like, Jake, the kid from I don't want to spoil anything, but Jake from the other place. Oh my God, that drove me nuts. That drove me completely nuts.
It was a really odd stylistic choice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't understand it at all. He doesn't do that with any of the crazy flashbacks that would have been helpful for me to get some context for.
Right.
But
Yeah.
like, I know, I was there. It was
like
a minute ago.
It would have been nice if he did it for like Court or like some of the people that we hear about for a long time before we actually see a flashback about them, rather than the one person we have seen recently even.
Yeah. I kept forgetting who Court was, and then who's his other friend that like grows up with him.
I don't remember the name.
He has a longer
Bert.
name starting with a
Corbett?
C. Yeah,
something Bert.
Something like that. Yeah. And I could not remember for the life of me who that was every time until halfway through the book or so.
Yeah. But nope. Allie, the woman I slept with back in Tull. Remember her? Maybe that was just a like conquest thing. And he was just so pleased that she begged him to sleep with her. And he was like, remember that girl who begged me to sleep with her? Yeah.
He doesn't do that with like the other woman that he mentions having been in love with or whatever, whom we hear about by name.
Yeah, I don't know. I got the feeling that Allie was like someone who will not be in his memory for very long. Like he's just passing through. It's a thing that happened. He didn't really like care for her or anything. And it just kind of becomes this thing, like even with her like begging him to stay and stuff in his like inner monologue or in the narration, you can just tell that he doesn't have any feelings whatsoever about this person, which I guess is fine. But I got the vibe that he just, rather than thinking so much of like this conquest or anything, he just thought like nothing of her. It was.
But see, I feel like that actually, because I got that same vibe, but I feel like that makes it the fact that he's constantly talking about Allie, the girl from Tull, like weirder.
Yeah, it's a writing choice.
Because if he doesn't have any feelings for her, why is he constantly bringing her up?
And that's where I would say it's probably less on the character and more on King.
Yeah.
For writing that in, you know.
Well, that's always the question, right? Like how much of this is the gunslinger, that because it's in third person, but it's pretty close third person, and a lot of the narrative is
right,
you know, the gunslinger's opinions. So how much do we say, oh, that's characterizing, and how much do we say, Stephen King, what the fuck?
Yeah. I mean, I would feel comfortable with most of this kind of being Stephen King, what the fuck. Like I think when he did like whatever revision, I think he should have just rewritten the whole thing. Like instead of making like small edits, like just bring it up to modern day. Did you guys know that this whole story was posted in like a magazine or something? Like it was originally in all these like different issues of whatever magazine, and that's how this story began.
Yeah, it was a collection of short stories that were published.
Wait, that explains everything.
Yeah. Right?
That's why they're reminding us who Allie is, because you didn't read about it 10 pages ago. You might have read about it a month ago.
Oh, I didn't even catch on to that.
But that makes sense for the original format.
But you should have fixed it for the novel. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Why wouldn't you fix it? Right.
Well, at least that explains why that was there to begin with. That should have been an obvious thing to fix, but I'm actually 100% less annoyed by it now. not 100%. I'm like 50% less annoyed with it now.
Real quick, do you guys like that when you're reading a series and every book has kind of a usually pretty quick reminder of like how the magic system works or how this thing or that thing works or who this person is? Or does that annoy you? Because I find when I binge read, and Dresden Files does this a lot, when I'm binge reading something, the constant reminders annoy me, but I could imagine if you're reading it for the first time, it might be nice. I don't know.
I think it depends on how it's done.
Yeah.
Like I want something that's subtle and that flows with the story.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily need it at multiple points. Like the other thing with the reminders about Allie is that it's not just once at the beginning of each story. Like it's multiple times within a story. And like at that point, you've already reminded me who Allie is. I don't need that other reminder. And so when you do something like that, where it's just hitting me over the head with this catch-up knowledge, that starts frustrating me.
Yeah.
I agree completely. I think there are clever ways to like work it into the narrative and just sort of jog the reader's memory or let the reader in on the know-how if they're a new reader starting at not the first book. I don't know. Is that a thing people do?
Yeah.
But there's definitely clumsy ways to do it, like Allie, the woman I slept with in Tull. Okay, this is the part where we say who should read this book.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a hard one.
I think, Sarah, your comment about it being genre changing when it came out is something we should lean on, right? Like if you're interested in the history of the genre and want to see like some of the foundational works from a long time ago, I think there's value there.
I mean, if you're a Stephen King fan who likes fantasy, you should read this book.
And probably people who are used to reading older fantasy, because a lot of the older fantasy that I have read has been very, very similar storytelling wise. So maybe people who are into like, I don't know how old Malazan is, but
I don't think Malazan is that like old, is it?
Is it? Okay. I've never read it.
I've never read it either, actually. You know, it's funny. I'd never heard of Malazan until we started the podcast. And then I got on Twitter and everyone talks about Malazan.
99.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, 99.
I'll never read it. It's too complicated. Too much.
I would give it a shot, but it's not a priority.
Yeah, there was a moment in this book where I forgot we were in a flashback. So we see his donkey die and it's very much like, oh, he's so cool. He doesn't even care that his, noble steed, his donkey, died. And it's like, he doesn't give a fuck. And then suddenly he's talking about riding his donkey into town. And I was like, what? Wait, did he get a new donkey? What's going on? And then I realized, oh.
It's a flashback.
I didn't have any problems like delineating the flashbacks from the current action.
Yeah, no, that was just a brain fart.
I definitely think that it was like, I don't know, not done as well as I've seen it done in other books.
Yeah, I don't really know what constitutes a good flashback, but I've definitely seen it done really well in books. But I would say probably for maybe like 75% of the ones that I've read, I've never liked them, no matter whether I'm reading on paper or audiobook. It's especially bad with audiobook, but I just never really feel like they're done smoothly enough. I mean, you guys did the Night Angel episode with us, and there's that flashback somewhere near the end where it's like going over events that happened earlier, and that is the worst flashback. That is like, it's like, wait, why are we repeating all this? Oh, we're in a flashback. It would have been nice of you to tell us,
I remember that one also completely throwing me. At least in the Gunslinger, it had its own section. That just happened to be when I had put it down and then picked it back up. So I completely forgot the context for the section I was starting.
But that's not something you get if you're like Spencer listening on audio.
Oh.
Right. Yeah. It's just going. And then all of a sudden you're in a different time period or whatever.
Oh, yeah. That'd be terrible.
Yeah. I don't think I could deal with flashbacks on audio at all, unless you specifically have someone like in the narration saying, in his flashback, he thought about, which is horrible writing.
Right.
And this section is italicized.
Yes.
So do they not say like chapter 1, section 2 or any of that?
They do, but there's nothing to delineate it as a flashback. Matter of fact, I didn't know a lot of the scenes that I had heard over audiobook. I didn't even know were flashbacks until I watched a YouTube video later where they did like a whole summary. In the summary, he was like, and then Gunslinger remembers this scene. I'm like, oh, that was in the past. Okay, I get it.
Yeah, that must have been so confusing.
Yeah, it threw me for sure.
So who should read this book?
I think if you are interested in reading something that was genre changing when it came out, which this book was, I mean, credit where credit is due. When it came out, I think the first short story was published in 78 and the book itself came out in like 82 or something. Like it was unique and not something that really had been seen before. So if you're interested in seeing a foundational work of the genre, you should read this. If you're a Stephen King reader and you like fantasy, or a fantasy reader and you like Stephen King, you should read this.
And that's it. Those are the only two people who should read this.
Well, I might say too that, like, you know, this series has a huge fan base, and it's got to have that fan base for a reason. You know, I would say maybe people that are willing to put up with a bad first book, or maybe a bad first couple books. I haven't read beyond this one, so I don't actually know. But, you know, someone who's willing to really commit to like a whole series or something might be interested, because I'm sure it gets better at some point. Like it has to. It has such a huge fan base.
You're so optimistic.
I know. But, you know, Twilight has a huge fan base too. So,
hey, Twilight is good for 12-year-old girls. And that's who should read that book.
Yeah.
Twilight knows its audience.
It does. Yeah.
Yeah. Dark Towers. If you're patient and willing to see apparently what the author set out to write the longest popular book in history, if that appeals to you.
Yeah.
Sounds like a lot of filler to me. Actually, this book didn't feel like it had a lot of filler. So
it felt like it happened too fast. I kind of want to talk about, I'll wait for spoilers and
I'll stop stalling. I have a lot of spoiler comments too. To avoid spoilers, skip to 1:19:30.
Okay, so I wanna ask you about what you were just talking about. You called it gun rape. Are you talking about the thing at the beginning with the girl, the lady that was pregnant with the demon child or whatever?
Yes.
Yeah, the preacher.
Okay, so I have heard so many, like I should have just gone back and reread the chapter, but I was probably just listening to it and just kind of ignored everything that was happening because everything was confusing at that point. What happened? Because Gabe said one thing that made me go like, whoa, is that what happened? And then the YouTube video said another thing that mentioned the gun, but didn't mention that it was gun rape. So I have no idea what happened in that scene.
So we also disagreed.
Yeah. My reading of it was that he physically violates her with the gun.
Okay. Because I thought he just like shot her.
I mean, that might also, I'm actually unclear on whether the gun goes off.
Okay.
I don't think the gun goes off.
I don't think it does. Yeah.
Like I don't think he actually shoots at all. I think that he just sticks the gun in her.
Right.
So when I read it, I thought that he was just pointing it at her from between her legs, because there's a line where he says he makes sure her secret flesh does not touch him. And I was like, oh, so Stephen King is saying, don't worry, guys, it's not actual penetration, so that makes it okay, right?
Oh.
But then I realized that it's him that it's not touching, not the gun. So maybe the gun is still involved in an intimate place.
Jesus.
I definitely read it as like his hands are not in her, but his gun is.
Right. Okay.
Because there's the line about how her body is trying to take it in. Because, of course, she's still a whore even during this awful moment.
Yeah.
Because she's a woman. Yeah. Also, yeah, what was happening there? Not sure.
So I had heard when I watched the YouTube video, the guy kind of explained some, I don't know if I would call it lore or what, but so from what it sounds like, all the people in this world are like part of this world where people have mutations and have all these like genetic kind of disorders and everything is just really messed up. But apparently it is kind of hinted at in this book that the gunslinger, the man in black, and that lady are not from this world. And so they all kind of have this, I guess, supernatural attraction to the people around them in this world where everybody is kind of messed up physically and they're the only ones who aren't. Like if you notice when the gunslinger goes into the bar, when he first walks into that saloon, it kind of mentions how everybody there has some sort of like physical defect or maybe mental, something's going on with each and every one of them. And he's pretty much like the only really healthy person that's gone in there, and like everybody's like staring at him. He's like this person from another planet, it seems like to them. And so that's, again, it's just from a YouTube video I was watching, but he was kind of explaining some of the lore behind that, I guess, and why they're so different than the people around them.
I didn't realize that the preacher was one of them.
Yeah, I didn't get that about the preacher either.
I mean, except that she was beautiful and he was into her. Maybe that was the hint.
Yeah, it was kind of subtle. And that's kind of why I mentioned that everybody else has like physical defects, is because she doesn't. And it's like 100% normal in this world for everyone to have some sort of mutation because, you know, whatever happened in the past, you know, a big atomic bomb or whatever, it's caused some sort of, you know, big thing throughout the whole population. And so I don't know, that's kind of where he was going with it, is that the book had described her as like, you know, what someone would consider like a perfect physically person, I guess.
Interesting.
I mean, but at the same time, the gunslinger is like disgusted by what she looks like. Like he's super attracted to her, but he's also repulsed by her.
Yeah. I don't know.
It was just weird.
It was a weird scene. Yeah.
It was very weird.
It's interesting having it confirmed, though, that he is. So the worlds in this world are at this point pretty unclear. They talk about coming from different places, and I was unsure if he was just from somewhere really far away or if it was actually a different like plane of existence or a different time, because Jake is definitely from, you know, the quote modern world. But again, is that a different time? Is that a different universe? It's not clear yet.
My interpretation, I don't have anything to back this up. This is just from reading the first book. This is what I thought. I thought that the gunslinger is from the past, but the slow way. He has lived a lot of years chasing the man in black.
Yeah.
So he's just super, super old. And the world has evolved around him.
Interesting.
In ways that involve mutations or threadings or whatever the term for it is in world. Jake is from not a different time, but a different world.
From like ours, basically.
Yeah, from like our modern world, but it is a separate world. It's not just a separate time.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was how I interpreted that.
Yeah. Whether
or not that's right, I really couldn't say because I haven't read the series. I've only read this one book.
Yeah, I think kind of what I was thinking was, I think he's from a different world than what we see in the desert, because he talks about the desert being essentially infinite is kind of what it sounded like this is the world, like this desert is the world. And when it does the flashback describing where he grew up, it was so like completely different than anything else we see. He's like living in this castle, and didn't they have like an electric stove or something like that?
Yeah.
They had some modern things. And so my guess would be that he grew up in that world. And then while he was chasing, because I would guess that he was chasing the man in black through all the different realities that this guy is opening up, because that's what this whole series is supposed to be about, all these parallel realities that are kind of conjoined on this dark tower. And we saw that the man in black basically, technically he killed him, but he kind of pulled Jake from his world into this one, is what I gathered.
Yeah. See, I didn't think that they were actually in a different world. I thought that the difference in scenery and the difference in like technology levels was because just a shit ton of time had passed. More time than we are aware of as the reader.
Like pre-apocalypse.
Yeah, like years and years and years and years. Like centuries.
I had a different interpretation. I thought it was just a quirk of the civilization that we see in the bulk of this book is surrounded by such a huge desert that it might as well be completely isolated, because there is no longer a way of getting through the desert. like 50 years ago. I think they even say that a couple of people were alive when they remember trains. Like trains were not that distant, I think. Or maybe that was a Pony Express situation. But it used to be that you could get through the desert, but now that technology has sort of devolved or broken down to such an extent that the only thing to do is walk, and that will kill you. So they're basically completely isolated. That was the impression I got. And so he grew up in a place on the other side of the desert, which might as well be a different universe.
That's true. Yeah.
I think it's funny how we each have such distinct
I know.
ideas about what's going on here.
Well, that is kind of the cool thing about this book, right? Like, again, not my favorite read of the year, but that is something that it does really well, I think, is it kind of sets you in this world and it doesn't tell you what's going on. And I kind of wonder if it ever will. And so it kind of leaves it up to you to decide, like, what is going on here? Like, what is this world? They're living in this desert in the Western, in like a Western setting, but they also have like blue jeans. He's living in a castle, but they have an electric stove. Like it really does a lot to like make you have to think about it.
Yeah, that's the kind of ambiguity that I like.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't really matter how the gunslinger got here. What matters is that he's clearly an interloper, so to speak.
Oh my God, yeah.
And he's from very far away, and somehow he got here. And I kind of loved how simple the basic plot of the book was. Man finding man.
Yeah.
Like, that's it. That's the whole book, as he is hunting the man in black. Because that was so straightforward, all of the ambiguity around it was still anchored to this extremely concrete, comprehensible thing.
Right.
And that really helped me get through the book, where I think otherwise all of these questions might have made me get lost otherwise.
For sure.
I mean, I still didn't understand what was going on, but I was able to just like be lost and follow the plot.
Right.
But you brought up Jake, and he was probably my favorite character.
I'm not sure I needed to be told in quite such gruesome graphic detail what happened to him when he transferred over to the world of the gunslinger.
You don't want to read about children dying violently?
Not quite in that level of detail.
Remind me what it was.
He gets run over.
Yeah, he gets run over, but we hear about like how all of it feels and how like he tastes his shit in his mouth when it happens. And it was a lot.
Yeah.
He heard his own spine break.
Yeah.
Not fun.
It was just more than I was expecting. I mean, like at that point we had seen a lot of death, but most of the death of Tull was not described in that level of graphic detail.
Yeah.
I feel. So like it was just kind of not what I was expecting.
Just kind of out of nowhere.
Yeah.
I mean, it was upsetting and tragic, but it just made me feel more bad for Jake, which I think was the point. Like, he's this very lost kid who experienced his own death and then woke up in this literal hellscape.
Yeah.
I found the Falcon scene much more upsetting.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the Falcon scene was upsetting too. But by that point, like, I wasn't surprised that there was graphic depictions of violence because we had Jake.
Yeah.
It was the fact that, like, we hadn't had anything like that made me so, like...
I don't think it was how graphic the Falcon scene was. I think it was how heartless it was.
Yes.
It was pretty heartless.
Jake gets run over, but it's an accident. No one is murdering this child on purpose.
Well, Man in Black.
Okay, the Man in Black is, but not the people running him over. Versus the gunslinger going into a duel, and his only weapon is this Falcon.
Who he's befriended.
Yeah, he was his friend. And
this elderly Falcon.
Yeah, and he's like, oh, well, he's not very good anymore, so I guess I can just fling him at this person who will murder it.
Yeah.
And that's not Court's fault. He had a falcon flung at his face. I also would probably try to murder it.
Yeah.
If I had a mad falcon flung in my face. But like, shit, dude. That was rough. That wasn't about Jake, though, who I meant to talk about.
We got distracted.
I got distracted. So Jake is this lost kid that the gunslinger finds in the middle of the desert. And we later find out that the man in black sent Jake to this world in order to give the gunslinger a weakness, basically, which is heartless, but he's the villain. He's allowed to be heartless. But I loved that Jake did not let the gunslinger like get away with any of his bullshit. I feel like a lot of people are kind of like starstruck by the gunslinger in this book, and it got a little tiring. And Jake definitely like experienced hero worship, but he's a kid.
Yeah.
That didn't bother me at all. But when the gunslinger is like basically decides, I'm going to have to sacrifice this kid to get to my goal. And Jake realizes that's what's going on. And he fucking calls him on it.
Yeah.
That was great.
Yeah.
That was good, but I wanted it to have more impact. Like the gunslinger just kind of ignores it. Like there's no introspection. There's no
I know.
Like there's no inner conflict. He doesn't think about what Jake says beyond a cursory, yeah, he's right, I am just going to sacrifice him. Like it didn't hit emotionally the way that I wanted it to.
And that's kind of what I meant earlier by some of the pacing kind of bothered me a little bit, things happening too fast, because I think for me, just their relationship in general was very weird. Like they had 2 scenes with each other, I think, and then something happens. The gunslinger is running out of that cave or whatever, and he hugs the boy, and it's like, and that's when the gunslinger realized he loved the child. And I'm like, but they've like, why? Like, it's not like, I don't know. It's not like he sees something in this kid, like his long lost son or something. Like, why? Why does he care for the kid that much? Like, this is just somebody he found out in the desert. Like, why is this happening so fast? And then especially what you just said about this kid, saying like, I'm a poker chip or whatever. It's like, okay, I would have liked to have that happen over like their journey throughout the desert, like this slow, like coming to terms with, I do care for this kid. And then slowly realizing like the only way I'm going to get to the man in black is if I use, Jake to get there. And there was just none of that. Like when Jake ended up falling off the bridge or whatever, I was just kind of like, okay, like, bye, Jake, Like,
guess he's dead now.
Oh, that was so anticlimactic.
Yeah.
I agree with everything you guys have said. I loved Jake. I did not believe for a second that the gunslinger felt any of the things he claimed he did.
Yeah.
It was very tell and not show.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is just so much like emotional distance. Like I just didn't believe that they had a relationship beyond 2 people who just happened to be traveling together.
Right.
And not even like heartbreaking emotional distance.
Yeah.
Like it could have been the gunslinger refusing to invest his heart in this kid because he knows he's just going to die.
Right.
That could have been tragic.
Right.
And they spend so much time building up that the gunslinger is going to have to kill Jake in order to get to the man in black. And I was like, okay, you can't go through that experience and not have some introspection. Like that's going to be a great scene. And then we get to it and Jake just falls off a bridge.
Yeah.
The gunslinger doesn't even do anything.
Yeah. Like he could have taken a second to pull him back up or something and then keep running off after the man in black.
Or even after all of this time building up in the narration that like the gunslinger is going to have to sacrifice Jake, like make it more active than just Jake falling off of a bridge. Like make the gunslinger actually part of killing him.
Yeah.
If it was like they were both on the bridge and they were too heavy and only one of them was going to be able to get through. Yeah. So the gunslinger pushed him off.
Yeah. That'd be awesome.
That would have made me feel something.
Yeah.
But instead, Jake's like, save me. I think the exact line of dialogue is, nah, bitch. Sucks to suck.
Sucks to suck. God.
It's just such an anticlimactic ending for this character that I really, part of why I loved was how I was dreading his ending. And then the ending was just nothing.
Yeah.
Well, Jake seemed to have more emotional depth than any of the other characters, even though the whole book was basically from the gunslinger's point of view, I feel like we felt Jake's emotions more.
Yeah.
And so it made him a lot easier to empathize with and to like invest in him as a character than the gunslinger, who, for all that he was the point of view character, felt very like distant,
shallow.
Yeah.
For sure.
We have a couple of actually very good things to talk about, and only a little bit of complaining left.
Yeah.
So, speaking of big letdowns, one of the other things that the book really built up was the conflict with the man in black. And then we got to that, and it was just a big old monologue.
It was, I feel like, the most info dumpy section of the book.
See, I think this is where my opinion is going to differ slightly from your guys's, because I was certainly expecting like a big shootout or something, right? Like we're all expecting this big action scene. And for all we know, that's happening later in the series. But, you know, we're kind of expecting it in this book. Like there's so much antagonism between them. We expect this big explosion. But they meet up and they kind of sit by a campfire and talk about the way the world is. And even though that was a little disappointing, I really like, if there's one part of this book that I really liked, it was that info dumpy kind of monologue. I loved where like the man in black is talking about how we're a blade of grass in a sea of other blades of grass. And if that blade of grass gets cut, that's where you start to see like the leaf itself will deteriorate. And that's what's happening to this world. And that's why all these people have like these mutations. And that's why everything is a desert and all this stuff. It's because somebody severed the connection metaphorically to our blade of grass, and this world is dying. And I loved that whole thing. I don't know why, but it just intrigued me a lot. And then the whole thing about the infinite universes and everything.
I think it was a great concept. But again, like with so much in this book, I feel like the execution let me down.
I feel like that monologue was just so entirely for the audience and not for the gunslinger. Like really early on, the man in black uses the word universe, and the gunslinger is like, what is that word? I've never heard it before. Is it poetry?
Right. Yeah, I remember that.
And then later he's talking about like nuclei and nebula. And the gunslinger's just like, yeah, that's fine.
If the gunslinger is familiar with nebula, he should be familiar with universe.
But
I agree.
I'm just putting it out there.
I don't know that he was, though, because I think at least not before the dream or whatever the man in black showed him. Because remember, I think the gunslinger falls asleep, and then the man in black like shows him all these universes, like taking him way out there to like, I think the last thing he saw was like a sun with all these rocks around it and stuff. And it was like blowing his mind. And so I kind of wonder if that was meant to be the gunslinger's like awakening to all of these things. And then he kind of goes on this whole monologue.
I love that idea. I hope that's what was supposed to be happening.
Yeah.
What I saw on the page did not get me there.
Right. Yeah, that's fair.
Again, like great concept, especially if it is going to what you detailed. Poor execution.
Yeah.
Could have been more like what you said.
Yeah.
And less like what we got on the page.
I don't know. It like with this, and then also with Jake's death, if this is what a climax is like in The Gunslinger, I don't know why all those women were trying to sleep with him. This seems like setting themselves up for disappointment.
Yeah.
Oh, ouch.
If he at least had some introspection, like
I know,
any one, like a mental one-liner about, whoa, who knew? I feel like it could have gone a long way.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's genuinely or generally what our complaints about this book boiled down to. Like we wanted more introspection from the gunslinger, from the characters in this book.
But yeah, I think, you know, you're absolutely right. It could have done with more introspection because we got virtually none from him. And that's why he felt like such a shallow kind of one note character. And there's lots of interesting things in his life, like the whole rite of passage of him having to not kill his mentor, but like have this whole fight to be the next gunslinger. Like I was extremely interested in that, but that's something cool that happened to him. I would have loved to have had, like, there was no introspection like leading up to that, like, I've got to prove myself, or like, I need to get out of this town, so I need to become a gunslinger now, or like, all these different ways it could have gone. It was just like, suddenly he's like, yeah, I got to become a gunslinger right now. And I need to get my guns, and I need to, do this whole rite of passage. And it's like, okay, like, I guess
predicated entirely because he found out his mom is sleeping with the man in black. And he's like, my mother? No, got to go kill some bitches.
I really, for a book that is such a close third person, and it is so much told from the gunslinger's point of view, we never get any sense of how he feels, just what is happening to him.
He's too manly for feelings.
And I think that's a real weakness of this book. Like this book would be so much stronger if we actually had that emotional connection to what was going on in his, inner thoughts.
Yeah.
In that inner dialogue. Like if we actually felt what he was feeling instead of just being at a distance, removed from everything.
Yeah.
Is that a flaw of this book trying to mimic the old Western genre? Because that's just all sorts of, stoic, rugged men doing stoic, rugged, manly stuff.
Yeah, but I think that can be done well. Like, I think, like, look at, I don't know if you guys have ever played The Last of Us, but Joel from The Last of Us, he is a great archetype of that, but you still get like a lot of, what he's feeling in that game, in that story. And so I think that archetype can be done really well, whether it's a Western or a grimdark or epic fantasy or whatever. I just think that I honestly think that this book was just too early on in King's career. I think that's really what it was.
Oh, so that's an interesting point, because my question was, is it too early in the series? One of the things that we had been talking about was that there's no character growth, which is kind of similar to introspection would have at least been a step towards growth, right?
Yeah.
And is that because this is so early on in the series, he used this book to establish the character, and then we see him grow and learn as the series goes on? But we need a hint. You got to give me a hint if you expect me to read more.
I mean, not having read the rest of the series, I really can't say whether or not he grows in that respect. But as a first novel, not having any kind of hint as to the gunslinger's inner life and inner emotions makes me less inclined to move on to book 2. And I feel like you need that hook of knowing, even if his actions don't change, even if he's not actually growing as a character, changing as a character, just having access to that like internal thought process.
Yeah.
You need to feel more for the character in order to want to move on to book 2. And I didn't get that from this book.
For sure. Yeah.
Yep. I agree completely. This is one of those things. Okay, I only bring this up because you mentioned, Spencer, the Dresden Files earlier.
Yeah.
And I had sort of a similar reaction to the first Dresden Files book, which we read fairly recently.
That's fair. Yeah.
I was assured that the character does grow and things do develop.
Oh, yeah.
But the first book did not give me enough of that. But, hearing that it happens, I'm willing to give the series another shot.
Right.
I don't know anything about the Dark Towers.
Yeah.
So maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But it would still be nice if the author gave us some reassurance.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can only speak for the Dresden Files. I mean, by the time you get to like, it happens in smaller ways earlier on in the series, but especially by the time you get to like book 5 or 6, you are completely hooked on these characters, and you've had multiple moments of introspection and very, very emotional moments with especially Harry. And so, yeah, I think you would love the series if you do keep going with it.
See, and having that recommendation makes me so much more likely to pick up the next book. And, you know, the first book had issues, but it wasn't anything quite as off-putting as in The Gunslinger.
The first book of the Dresden Files was genuinely very fun.
Yeah.
In a way that I'm not sure I would categorize The Gunslinger.
No, and that's kind of what I was thinking about today, because the Gunslinger, like as a character, I think he is supposed to be this Western kind of shoot 'em up, like rogue, you know, man's man kind of character, and that can be fun, but it just wasn't filled out enough in this book.
If you're going to have a character like that, you need more depth.
Oh yeah.
And the Gunslinger, and really all of the characters in this book, the world felt very like involved and built out, but the characters themselves felt very shallow to me.
Except for Jake.
Except
for Jake, who dies, and we may or may not see him again. Jury's out on that.
Yeah, I'm sure he'll be back. I'm pretty sure he's part of the larger story going forward. But yeah, I would say the hook, like if the hook doesn't lie with the characters, which it should. Like I'm a character reader. I definitely think the hook should lie with the characters. But if it doesn't, I think for this book, maybe this series, the hook really lies with the world. And even though we don't know a lot about it right now, it's interesting enough to make me wonder, like, what's outside this desert? Like, what is the tower really? What is the big bad really? You know? And so it kind of asks those questions. And, you know, honestly, the more, as much as I didn't like this book, the more I talk about it, I'm kind of like, I think I might pick up book 2. Like, I think just to try it, like just to see what happens. Cause you know, especially that whole thing at the end, it made me really curious. And I hope that Stephen King does. I mean, obviously he grows eventually into the author he is now, but I hope that, you know, in the next couple books, he grows into, you know, a better author. And I've just heard from so many people that they're like, you know, it's one of those series where you just have to keep reading until it gets better. And as someone who reads the Dresden Files and reads King's Dark Tidings, and I'm often the one who says, you got to get to book 2 or you got to get to book 4 or something, like, I understand that. So I could understand it being the case where you just have to get to book 2 or something to see what makes the series so special.
Well, now I'm feeling like we need to have a follow-up episode for book 2.
Are we going to be able to convince Gabe to read book 2?
No, there's no way. He hated this book. Yeah.
Oh,
He did not like this book. And as soon as I started it, I knew that it would not be a Gabe book. As soon as I was like a chapter in, I'm like, Gabe's probably not going to enjoy this. And that's fine. He doesn't enjoy every book that we do on the podcast, but
at least it wasn't too many pages.
Oh yeah, it was super short.
You know? Yeah.
I feel like we've turned around on this series. How did that
I know.
Oops.
Oh, did we actually like this book? I don't know.
I wouldn't go that far.
No, definitely not.
I mean, I feel like that's one of the joys of discussing a book for a podcast episode, is that as you go through the discussion, like, you kind of clarify your feelings and you're like, oh, actually, some of these things that I really didn't like about it, I still don't like, but I can see the value in it.
Right.
And I can see some of the value in the series, and maybe I've changed my mind about whether or not I want to continue. So
yeah,
like, that's one of the fun things about doing a podcast.
Yeah.
The downside,
in my opinion,
for sure,
is that Stephen King said he wanted to write the longest book in history. So
I mean,
who knows how long it's going to take to get good.
I am not arguing that we should read all of the books for the podcast.
If book 2 was not good, I would absolutely not read book 3.
Yeah.
This is the type of thing that I am probably going to go spend a lot of time on Wikipedia because I want to know what happens, but I have no patience for the books themselves.
Well, go check out, what was that? For the love of reading, he does a recap for each book, and he has like pictures and stuff. And it's
nice.
Yeah. And it was like a scene by scene recap of this entire book. And I'm like, man, like I would honestly just listen to him recap each book, because that was like way better than what I experienced.
That's okay. That is Stephen King in a nutshell for me. So interesting. I want to know more, but I do not want Stephen King to be the one to tell me the story.
Right. Yeah.
I love Kubrick's The Shining. It's so good. So I was like, oh, I'll read the book. I'll have to like this one, right?
People like the movie more.
Much more. It's so much better. Yeah.
Yeah.
I could not stand the book. And I was like, wow. I know this is a me problem or a generational problem, but okay. I definitely did think of the Men in Black every time that this book said Man in Black.
Right? I know.
I didn't actually think of that at all.
Really?
Yeah.
But there's pugs. There's pugs in that movie.
But there were no pugs in The Gunslinger, which may be why I didn't think of it.
Right.
That's the real fault of the book. It's true.
I mean, it is true that this book would have been 100% improved by the addition of a pug.
Yeah, for sure.
Which I think one can fairly say about most books.
Why wasn't there some sort of animal companion when he had his, what do you have, like a hawk or something in the flashback?
The falcon,
yeah, the falcon. I thought that he was going to have like this falcon companion for the rest of the book, and I was so bummed when it died by way of face beating.
That's because companionship is for pussies.
Yeah.
He also has the donkey, which also dies.
Yeah.
Immediately, and then confuses Lily for the rest of the book when it shows up in flashbacks. Any kind of emotion would have been nice.
I know.
I feel like that's part of this book having been like a young man's like fantasy, right? Like he's just so cool and hardcore, and all the women want him, and he doesn't feel anything, and all he does is kill people and get laid.
I think maybe for the time that it was written, but I think, whether you're a guy or a girl who likes, the man's man kind of archetype, I think we all crave a little bit of insight into that character's emotion. You know what I mean? Like you can be like the manliest man ever, but I think you still want some sort of like emotional connection to a character, right? And so I wonder if that was the author's idea of that archetype back in the 70s.
Yeah, no, I was really just criticizing Stephen King there.
Yeah, exactly.
for having bad goals, bad hero worship.
For sure.
No, I agree. Real people like real people.
Exactly, yeah.
Everyone likes a manly man, but you like to see a manly man cry.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
And I feel like, the Gunslinger, if we had felt him cry, would have been better.
Or hug a puppy without murdering it gruesomely.
That too.
Yeah.
That's not in the book. That was the falcon that I was metaphorizing. I don't want listeners to think that there's any puppy death, but
yeah. Or if he gave half a shit about his mule.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or if he gave half a shit about Jake.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of just saying, I loved him out loud after he just let him die for absolutely no reason.
Yeah,
it didn't benefit him at all.
That whole thing was so weird. Even when he kind of said that like in his head, even before, I was like, how do you love somebody that you've known for a week? You know what I mean? Like I don't buy it.
Oh, see, the struggling to survive trope gets around most of that for me personally. Like, two people relying on each other to survive, I can shortcut a lot of emotional development.
Sure.
But I need to actually see you get there.
Right. Yeah.
Don't just say you did.
For sure.
And then let them die for absolutely no reason.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a bit weird.
Sarah asked a very good question. Speaking of the Men in Black.
Yeah. So My question, reading this book as someone who has not read anything else in the series, the book ends with the gunslinger and the man in black having this long conversation, and then the gunslinger wakes up. It's been 10 years. The man in black is this skeleton sitting across from him. Do we think the man in black is actually dead?
No.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I think he's coming back.
Yeah.
I gave a much more qualified answer. I was like, well, maybe. And they hired someone else for the role. But then it turns out that the role gets all of the same like memories and experiences. So it's like, it's basically the same person. I went on a very long like conspiracy theory for no reason. I don't know why I thought it would be that complicated. You guys were like, yeah, no way.
No, but you're probably onto something there, because wasn't he also Martin?
Yeah, I mean, the man in black has multiple identities.
Bodies, I would maybe. Do you think Martin was a different body?
He talks about having a different face, I think, or something along those lines. So I don't know if it's specifically he swaps bodies or he's just able to like change his appearance or what.
Yeah.
So it's possible, like if he does swap bodies, it's possible that this body dies, but his soul or what have you is in someone else. I don't think we have seen the last of the man in black as he is in the first book.
Right. He does kind of mention somewhere in that monologue, and he says it about the gunslinger too. He says something to the effect of, we are basically immortal. There's some sort of line like that. He's like, we're basically immortal.
And that's part of why I think that the gunslinger's like backstory is years in the past, like that he's not from a different world, but just he's gone a really long time, maybe longer than he realizes, searching for the man in black.
Time is wonky in the desert.
Yeah, like time is wonky.
Mm-hmm. People are constantly like, I don't know, maybe a couple of weeks, maybe a couple months. Who can tell?
It was 3 poops ago.
Yeah, I love that.
I loved that. Yes. Give me concrete realism. I was taking his long life to be more like the Dunedain, Aragorn's 80, but he looks 30 kind of thing. Not like he's 5,000 years old. I don't know. Who knows, though?
I don't necessarily think that they're like 5,000, but like 500, maybe.
It could definitely go that far, and I wouldn't be like, but that doesn't make sense with the first book.
Yeah.
Right.
That just wasn't the impression that I got at this point.
Yeah.
Who knows? Okay, fine. You're right. Maybe we need to read the second book.
I think we need to read the second book. I'm not going to argue for book 3. At this point, I don't know if I could tolerate even book 2. I didn't really enjoy book 1.
No, but it went fast enough. Like, okay, I have read some bad fan fiction longer than this. I could stick out a second book.
This was 250 pages. Like it was fine.
Yeah.
I think book 2 is longer, but I do think that it would be really interesting to read book 2 and to see how our opinions change, if they change, how they change.
What I really want to do is skip to the last book and just say, fuck it.
Well, we could do that.
Yeah.
I'm going to be honest. Well, okay, if it turns out that the second book is enjoyable in any way, I could see giving the series a shot. But if the second book's not good, straight to the last book.
Yeah, new plan. We read book 2. If we like it, we continue the series on our own or for the podcast. If we don't like it, we just skip to book 8, however many books there are.
I'm looking that up right now.
When you guys were kids and like reading books, did you ever look at like the last page first just to know what happened? Or was I just a psycho kid?
No, that's all you, my dear.
I still don't do that, but I do sometimes go to Wikipedia instead.
Oh, really? That would kill me.
Because it depends on what's happening. Like, I don't necessarily want to know specifically the last page, but depending on how things are happening and what's happening, I do kind of want to know, like, how it gets to the last page.
Interesting.
So I'm not completely taken by surprise.
7 books. I definitely use doesthedogdie.com for movies constantly.
Does the dog die? What is this?
Yeah. DoesTheDogDie.com. If there's an animal in a movie, it will only spoil whether or not that animal dies.
Oh,
So
interesting.
you can emotionally prepare yourself. It's very useful. So we occasionally do a segment that's either about how words are really weird, which is what this one would be. Sometimes we talk about pet peeves, but we've bitched enough in this episode, I think.
This entire book has been a pet peeve.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
But my words are weird suggestions were just transmogrify, because it's a really good word that King did use in this book, and logi, because I had to look it up. And so sometimes I'll go, I had to look this word up. And sometimes it's just me, and sometimes it's legit.
I don't know how many video games you guys play, but do you have any sort of connection with transmogrified?
If that's the name of a game, no. But I definitely play games where that's like the name of a skill and stuff, if that's what you're talking about. Yeah.
So the only thing I know about transmogrified, and this may not be the actual definition, but usually like in a video game, if you have a good set of armor, but it doesn't look cool, and then you have another set of armor that looks cool, but it doesn't have like good stats or whatever, you would transmogrify it. And what that would do is make your good armor look like the cool armor. So it like swaps their appearance. It swaps their appearance. That's all.
So I've always kind of understood transmogrify as just to change, but I looked it up right now.
Okay.
And apparently it is to change or alter greatly, which is what I understood it to be, and often with grotesque or humorous effect.
What?
Which I did not realize was part of the definition.
That's weird.
Yeah, words are weird, right?
Words are weird.
Also, like transmute and transmorph, I know like all the root words there.
Yeah.
But what's mog? How does one mog something in a trans way or otherwise?
I don't know. That is weird.
Okay, so according to Merriam-Webster, did you know? We know that the prefix trans means across or beyond, but we don't know the exact origins of transmogrify. The 17th century dramatist, novelist, and poet Aphra Behn, who is regarded as England's first female professional writer, was an early adopter of the word. In her 1671 comic play, The Amorous Prince, Behn wrote, you'd love would transmogrify me to a maid now. A century later, Scottish poet Robert Burns applied the word again in verse, aptly capturing the grotesque and sometimes humorous effect of transmogrification. See social life and glee sit down, all joyous and unthinking, till, quite transmogrified, they're grown debauchery and drinking.
All right. I can get down with that.
Fair enough.
So there you go.
Did you guys find out what kind of sentence logi would be used in?
Oh,
like what?
It's just like being slow. I think the example sentence was like they drank so much beer they felt logy, which is almost exactly how it was used in the book, I think.
Okay.
I don't remember seeing it in the book, but it's not, I mean, I was not paying attention to every single thing. I was like, I just want to be done with this.
Yeah.
It just sounded like loogie. And I was like, I bet it does not have anything to do with loogies. I was right. It does not.
No, it does not.
To mog. I'm going to use the word mog instead of change now forever.
Okay. So, Spencer, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast to talk about the Gunslinger with us. We have just had an absolute blast talking with you. Can you tell our listeners what you're up to, where you can be found on the internet, all of those good things?
Yeah. So my co-host, Gabe, who couldn't be here tonight because he's in a cage, he and I do this podcast called Fantasy Files. We do lots of different things. Usually it's kind of like this, where we'll discuss like a fantasy book that we're both interested in. It's usually like a full spoilers discussion, but we've branched out a lot over the past year to do spoiler-free reviews, video game reviews. Right now we're watching Mr. Robot and doing a whole series on that. So we're kind of all over the place, but I would say our bread and butter is talking about fantasy and sci-fi books. Mostly we're on YouTube. We do have like 6 episodes up on Spotify. I definitely need to add the rest of our 43 episodes onto Spotify, which is going to be a very long Saturday one of these days. So you can find us on YouTube. Just look up Fantasy Files Podcast and, I'll get us over on Spotify soon enough. You can also follow us on Twitter at Files Fantasy, where it's mostly me that's on the Twitter. I do a lot of like sci-fi and fantasy recommendations. I usually do these kind of check-ins where I'll read a book, and if it's something that we're probably not going to discuss on the podcast, I'll just kind of tweet about it, and I'll make a snapshot of my little Audible chapter and be like, this was great. So there's lots of that. And there's pictures of my dog, Hank, on there all the time because he's just way too cute to not put on the internet.
Hank is king.
Yeah, Hank is king. Yeah, and there's probably also a lot of, really bad sci-fi and fantasy opinions that I have all the time. So if you just need somebody to argue with, like, follow us on Twitter, because I could do that.
You're really providing a service to society.
I know. Yeah. I'm kind of like Twitter's punching bag, I would say.
Oh. Well, I'll come just agree with whatever you say, no matter how ridiculous it is. So that
I appreciate that.
A horde behind you. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been so much fun. I can't believe you somehow flipped this to convince us to read the second book.
I don't know how I convinced myself, honestly, because at the end, like before, probably like an hour or so before getting on this podcast, I was like, am I just going to talk shit about this book the entire time? And then, as we discussed it, things happen.
Sometimes books are bad, but they're fun to talk about.
Yeah.
And also we did talk shit about it for this entire podcast, basically.
Yeah, we did.
Also true.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Can't wait to talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fiction Fans.
Come disagree with us. We are on Twitter and Instagram at FictionFansPod. You can also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
If you enjoyed the episode, please rate and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and follow us wherever your podcasts live.
Thanks again for listening, and may your villains always be defeated. Bye.
Bye.